I'll talk about a few things that all of you know. But from 2020, for 2 years, we all suffered draconian measures based on unscientific and fictional modelling. These measures were enforced by a tyrannical government that repeatedly claimed to be following the science. I think we can all agree they did not. They created a science designed to fit a narrative, while these unscientific measures, restrictions and mandates were forced upon us. During this time, it was not easy to be a dissenting voice. Most of us were censored, silenced and cancelled, but some of us were arrested, charged and convicted for exercising our human right to peacefully protest against these cruel and harmful measures. We were isolated, terrorised and oppressed, and this was their new normal. While dissenting voices were silenced and ridiculed, and people who peacefully demonstrated were criminalised, the masses were coerced and manipulated through the use of behavioural science, fear-mongering and wartime propaganda. They were forced into taking an experimental vaccine, and this is their new normal. So most recently, I've run a campaign for the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. Two of those ladies are in the room with us today, one who lost her mother and the other who's injured herself, who campaigned for truth and justice, not just for themselves, but for future vaccine injured, and we know that will come. I've campaigned for 2 years telling people that it would be safer to wait, that to discourage them from needlessly participating in an experiment. Unfortunately, today we see the results of a mass vaccination campaign rolled out globally with no informed consent. They mandated an experimental vaccine. They threatened people with the loss of their livelihoods. And now thousands of people in the UK alone have suffered life-changing injury, while others have been killed. This is their new normal. Our rights and freedoms were stripped from us in a way that we have never experienced before. The very people we may have once believed were democratically elected into their positions of privilege to govern by the people, for the people, committed fraud upon the people. I believe that today this fraud has been exposed. As Orwell said, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. This power grab, as we know it, if we do not resist, will be that force, and that force will be our new normal. I stand with you today to congratulate these citizens for taking the first steps to tackle the transfer of power from the people to the unelected and unaccountable World Health Organization. Secondly, I'll call upon the citizens of the world to unite in their respective countries, as we will do in ours, and across all continents of the world, and to tell those citizens that you do have a choice. You have the power to effect change, and you have a voice, so use it. Now we must work together to stand against this power grab and at the very least raise mass awareness, encourage and demonstrate mass non-compliance. You have a choice not to choose their new normal. Thank you.
With my European friends standing shoulder to shoulder on an issue of the most importance in our lives and those of our children. So I didn't expect to be here, but I think we can all say that over the last 3 years, a lot of things have happened in our lives that we didn't expect to happen. So desperate times lead to desperate measures. And my main point, the main point I want to make in my address to you today in the time that I've got available is that, and I want you to hear loud and clear, that the very concept of the democracy that we've taken for granted all of our lives is under threat as it never has been before. And it's not just in my country, it's not across Europe, it is across the whole of the world. It's not from external armies mounding up on our borders this time, but it is from the corruption and the decay of our own institutions who are allowing this to happen. I think every one of us who's elected and represents our people, we need to remember that we are always the servants of the people. We are not their masters, and some of my colleagues and some elected representatives around the world have forgotten this lesson. They will need to learn this lesson again. We are entrusted to represent our constituents and their best interests at all times. And when their rights are threatened, we are duty bound to defend them. Again, many of my colleagues seem to have forgotten that, and the turnout even for the WHO debate in our Parliament was very, very disappointing. So, the Global Pandemic Treaty is such a threat to our sovereignty, looming ominously on the horizon, together with the amendments to the international health regulations, which will fundamentally, if they're passed through our parliaments, alter the relationship between the citizens and the state. The WHO would paint an illusion of nation states coming together to fight deadly pathogens, when it's really, as we've already heard, a power grab by an unaccountable elite, rather keen to reinforce the power shift that has already happened in the global pandemic response to COVID-19. The recommendations made during COVID-19 by the WHO were advisory, and they now want them to become mandatory. I mean, let's face it, the WHO did not exactly cover themselves with glory with their recommendations during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a litany of disaster, a disaster which the WHO were not even keen to look into. They've had no review of their performance and their recommendations during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. So confident are they that their ideas and their advice was absolutely perfect. So there can be no doubt that if we fail to learn the mistakes of history, certainly that as far as the WHO are concerned, they are doomed to repeat them. So the World Health Organization is an unelected, diplomatically immune, tax-exempt group that bears no resemblance to the good faith Florence Nightingale Union of Nations set up over 75 years ago. Public health and the decisions surrounding it now exist as a monopoly of the WHO, headed up by bureaucrats in Geneva, whose leadership has been embroiled in scandal after scandal. And the majority of the influence on the WHO now is by external entities. And indeed, as has been mentioned, one of the richest men in the world has a massive influence over the WHO. Indeed, I think 84% of all the funding of the WHO now is by external commercial sources, with an ability to direct the area that your generous donations to the WHO will send their policies. So it's basically pay to play. If you have enough money, you can influence the WHO. Not exactly the people I'd like to be deciding in the future whether my constituents are locked into their houses, whether they can see their relatives, if they have to wear masks, and if they have to take mandatory medication. I would say the least qualified people in the world to make those decisions. And any parliament that decides to abdicate its responsibilities to its constituents does not deserve the name of being a parliament and does not deserve a seat in any elected assembly. We have no right to relinquish our sovereignty, the sovereignty of our nations, because it's not mine to give away. It's not any of us to give away. Sovereignty always belongs to the people, and every election should be returned back to the people, where they will again decide who they allow to represent them for the next parliamentary period. Forests can be grown for 1,000 years, but could be chopped down in a few weeks, and the same is with our democracy. I've actually been shocked, and I think people in the UK have come to take our democracy and freedoms as a right, an entitlement, that's something that would never be taken away. But I'm equally shocked that those in Europe who have suffered under tyranny in living memory would, again, perhaps acquiesce to that position again without resistance. So I don't think I'm being dramatic when I say that the Global Pandemic Treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations will allow the WHO to declare a public health emergency of international concern, a FAIC, abbreviated to, and not only when to call it, but how long it would last and when it would be over. And I suspect that it would be a very long time before we had democracy returned to our independent parliaments. I call on every elected representative around the world to resist these WHO power grabs. It would be a dereliction of our democratic duty that we have to our electorates. There's no way that we should be signing away sovereignty without the agreement of the people, and that would take a referendum in each country to hand over those sort of powers, and I would settle for nothing less. I will end with a quote from America, which I think, since we've had Dr. McCullough on, I think is quite apt. It said that when the people are scared of the politicians, that is tyranny. But when the politicians are scared of the people, that's democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to get to the latter, and we need to get there quickly. We're in dangerous times.
We need to raise the volume on the sound of freedom in so many areas. I want to end my speech with the invitation to every person out there to watch out for a film that is based on a true story with this exact title, The Sound of Freedom, that has its premiere today on July 4th. And please save the date. We warmly invite people from all over Europe and from throughout the world to come to our Europe for Trust and Freedom rally to the city of Vienna in Austria on October 1st, 2023. It will be wonderful to experience the feeling of unity at such a big in-person live event. And you will find further information on our webpage, the euci.info. Thank you so much.
And hopefully this will now spread with the hashtag Trust and Freedom. And we know we're already seeing people contacting us via our website and through the media. So really, we would really appreciate for everybody to share that and spread that information about the ECI and what happened here today. Thank you.